All right, folks, welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. And today we've got none other than Mr. David Hens here to help me do this group that's behind me here. As you can see in the picture, none other than the great Deep Purple. Welcome.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's awesome to have you on here again. We can talk some of these great albums from the past here by this band who, well, let's see, we got 21 in all. We decided not to count the covers album. It's the newest album, but as it is with most things, people really don't really care about a covers album when you're ranking the true catalog of the band. It would probably end up last for me, my look. So,
Yeah.
all right. So, without further ado, we're just going to get right into it because we got 21 albums to rank here, and we want to get it done in a timely fashion. So, let's go ahead and start off. We're just going to do it traditional style. You're going to give me your 21, number 21, and then I'll give you mine, and we'll just go from there. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good. Uh, yeah, my first one is Slaves and Masters from 1990. Now, obviously, Gillan was gone, so they bring in Joe and Turner to sing. And I'm a big fan of Joe and Turner with Rainbow, and I like a lot of that stuff. But for me, this album never really sounded like a true Deep Purple album. I mean, like I highlighted like the title track is good, and the Cut Runs Deep is the second track on the album. That's a pretty good song. It might be the best song on the album. But I also read that they considered bringing in Jimmy Jamison from Survivor to sing on that album before Joe and Turner was available. Which I guess it's not. It's kind of like that Foreigner esque AOR material that Richie Blackmore wanted to transition Rainbow into. So I've always thought of this album as kind of like an extension of the Been Out of Shape from '83, which is the Rainbow album with Street of Dreams on it and stuff like that. It kind of fits into that same category. But yeah, I don't really go back to this album too often. So that's my number 21.
All right. All right. Sounds good. That's a good way to kick it off. And for me, my number 21 is the band's most recent release, studio wise, Whoosh. Um, for me, trying to listen to this one was a little tough. I mean, it has a lot of good elements here and there. You can hear the keyboards, you can hear the guitar, but for some reason, there just weren't a lot of songs that really stood out to me. It was all kind of just middle of the road kind of stuff. The one song that kind of got my attention was Nothing at All, and that's probably the only song I'll be able to mention about on this album. So that one actually charted, came out in 2020, charted at number 161, and which was a return. They had a couple albums there that weren't charting, so at least they made the charts with that one. So, Whoosh, number 21 for me. What do you got for your next one, number
All right.
20
My
there?
next one is number 20 is The Battle Rages On from '93. That's the last album they did with Blackmore before he left. And for me, it just kind of it felt a little forced. Like when I listened to it, it just seems like he's already checked out. Like none of those songs really. I mean, I highlighted like Ramshackle Man and Nasty Piece of Work as the two that are okay, but it just seems like the band was pretty much ready to be separated at that point. So
Yeah, I think Blackmore left in the middle of that tour.
yeah.
So yeah, it's a shame you finally get everybody back together again, and then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, oh, they couldn't keep their differences. They had to break up the band once again.
Mhm.
All right, so so that's your number 20. Mine is gonna be Now What. All right, so Now What, number 20 for me. That was the one that came out in 2013. Did reach number 110 on the charts. Pretty much all the Purple albums, the later day ones, either didn't chart or unfortunately reached the high end of the charts. So that one was number 110. Two songs that come to mind here: Uncommon Man, All the Time in the World. Those are the two that stood out for me. Um, same type of scenario, as with most of these later day Purple albums. They do have their elements. There's definitely good parts, but as a whole, the songs just for me they just don't stand out. Like the old school stuff.
Mhm.
It just it has bits and pieces. You hear some great solos from Steve Morris, and then you can hear Don Airey on the keyboards, reminding you, taking you back to the day of the purple keyboards of old sound on certain tracks. But then, I guess maybe with Gillan singing in a lower key there, he's not the Gillan he used to be. I mean, obviously it's not easy to be, but that could have a little to do with it. But I think a lot of their problem is their songwriting and their lyrics. The lyrics, they got some weird, goofy lyrics over the last five
Mhm.
albums. I'll say that much. But
Yeah.
those two songs, still, definitely they stand out and definitely are worthy of being mentioned.
Yeah, they definitely got more experimental with when Steve Morse came in, so the arrangements changed a lot.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we got 19.
Oh yeah, my number 19 is Bananas, which is the first album without John Lord, so it was Don Airey's first appearance on the record, and that's just very. I mean, highlighted one song, "Picture of Innocence," from it, and the other song that it's kind of grown on me since I've been listening to it more is "Haunted," because it's the first time they ever used a backing vocal. Beth Hart, the British singer, actually sings backing vocals with Ian Gillan on that song, and that's actually pretty good. But most of the album is just forgettable. And I mean, even the album cover with the guy holding all the bananas in the front doesn't really seem like a Deep Purple concept, but like the Deep Purple we all know and love. But it's
Yeah, that's probably one of the most strangest covers that they've
yeah,
ever come up with there for sure.
mhm,
All right. Yeah. So my number 19, we're going to go back to the year 1998 for Abandon. Um, this album, I don't know, it just this one is there's another one that just doesn't really do much for me. Although I would say Fingers to the Bone is the one song that I dig on the album, but overall, just one of those albums that's just. And I actually thought this one was going to end up being number 21, but they were neck and neck these ones for the choices.
mhm,
I'll say that much. They pretty much, you know, it was like maybe just a one song difference that kind of separated them off and ranked them kind of where they are. So, had it had one more decent song on, it might have shot it up a little bit higher. So, to the good. But unfortunately, that's my number 19.
yeah. All right. My number 18 is Deep Purple 3, which is the third album from the Mark One lineup. And the only song I highlighted off of it is "Chasing Shadows" is okay, but I mean, really, a lot of those Mark One. I mean, Blackmore's playing is good, but it doesn't really stand out as much as it does on the later albums. I mean, but for me, all of the first three albums are kind of like there's a lot of psych, a lot of garage influence still, but I mean, John Lord's Hammond organ is pretty much the highlight of all three of those early albums for me.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely agree on that. And it seemed like they did a lot of covers on those first three
yeah.
albums too. I mean, obviously each one I guess kind of got a little bit better as
Mhm.
time went on. But yeah, that's how at least it looks like on my list for mine coming up here. But what can you do? There was when the band's early days. That's where how they were able to finally get, and then once Ian Gillan and Roger Glover came in, then it was all, what a difference. All right, so that was number 18 for you. Mine, we're gonna go to another newbie here with Infinite. Um, another one. This one actually has the surprising. I really like that song. That was actually one that I wasn't too. It kind of hit me. I didn't realize. Song definitely is one that kind of came out of nowhere on me, and I really dig it. It definitely gives you a better impression overall. Like if you never heard this song, and you listen to it and you go, "Wow, it doesn't really fit with the rest of the album because of the way it is." It definitely, like you said, a lot of experimental. This one came
Mhm.
out in 2017, so it was one of the more recent, the second last studio album they made, not counting the covers. And it does have a good cover on it, believe it or not. They did a really good job on Roadhouse Blues. I felt that I had to mention because I really thought I'm not a really big Doors fan per se, but I thought they did the song justice. I
Mhm.
really thought it was pretty good there, and so that gives me my number 18 for you there.
All right, my number 17 is Rapture of the Deep. And this one, I highlighted the title track is pretty solid, and Junkyard Blues is a kind of that's one of the songs I kind of like off the album. But really, I mean, a lot of those later like albums with Steve Morris, I mean, I like some of them, but not all of them. They're kind of hit or miss for me. So they're just I don't like it. I mean, for in terms of like getting any radio play or attention, it's I mean, most people don't really care about the new Deep Purple lineup anymore, except for the old fans, unfortunately. But they still are a very good live band, even if we don't love the albums they put out with Steve Morris all the time. The live shows are still really solid.
Yeah, definitely. I can attest to that. I haven't seen them a couple times over the last few years when they were out there touring here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they put on some really good shows with Morse on guitar, and definitely did they do the catalog quite well live.
Mm-hmm.
And Ian Gillan, for all intents and purposes, the last time I saw him, I think it was 2018 out at Darien. He sounded really good. You know, even if you
Mm-hmm.
on Highway Star, even if you pull up the YouTube, there's one on there from Darien, and I mean he did a really great job on that. That was the opening track of the night, so.
Yeah, I was at that show. That was good. That was a really good show. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought they were really, really awesome that night. And Priest opened that show, and they really did they really got the house going there. But
Yeah.
it was kind of a weird lineup seeing those two together, even though they're two older bands. But
Mm-hmm.
Priest pretty much played a lot of their more, their '80s and some of the new album. But once Deep Purple got on there and really started to, oh man, that was just. I wish we can go
Mm-hmm.
back and see that show again. I liked it so much. So. All right, so that was 17. So with me, I'm going to with the one you mentioned earlier today, bananas. So that one, like you said, probably the strangest cover. I mean, they don't really even use the logo on here or anything. Just a weird album title. There are two songs that I actually thought, and it's weird. This is one of those albums where you're listening to it, and you don't hear something, you don't feel anything, and then all of a sudden it gets near the end, and all of a sudden, wow, what was that? And Walk On was one of the songs that really stood out to me. I consider that to be the best song on the album, and the last song, Contact Lost, stood out. That was so it was a good song to end the album on. It just it's a shame it took so long for me to get warmed up to the album because it was over with by the time I actually start liking the last few songs. So that was 17, and man, seems like I got a lot of these newer ones on my end here, and you got quite a few yourself there. And then
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's just I think that's the way the catalog is. It's
Mm-hmm.
just we got so much good stuff to be coming up shortly. Something's got to be near the end, unfortunately, and those albums are the main thing here. So what do you got for 16?
16, I have the House of Blue Light.
Oh,
I mean, I like it, but for me, when the Mark II lineup gets back together with Perfect Strangers, that was a great album. But then I feel like they kind of lost a little bit on the second output. But I do like Call of the Wild and Hard Loving Woman. But again, I don't know if it's just like the '80s production. I don't know if I like Blackmore's soloing as much as I did on his playing on Perfect Strangers. I just prefer, but House of Blue Light, it's not a bad album. I just don't find myself going back to it as much.
okay. All right. And that was 16. So I'm going with Rapture of the Deep. I believe, yeah, you mentioned this one. Yeah, I'm surprised. This one actually, you mentioned a few tracks on here, but the one for me was one that actually stood out, was one that you didn't mention, and that was Clearly Quite Absurd. I know it's Gillen, not really. He's more. It's definitely a lower tone song. He's not out there screaming like it's Highway Star or anything. But that song had a lot of melody to it, and I really, really liked that one. That one definitely. As soon as the first time I heard it, I liked that one right off the bat. And then Rapture of the Deep was one you actually mentioned. That was one of the better songs on the album, Junkyard Blues. But other than that, just a lot of good pieces, but the songs just don't stand out. That's all for me, other than the ones I mentioned.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to number 15.
All right. Number 15 for me is Shades of Deep Purple, the first album. The, I went back and listened to this a few times this week. I mean, again, I like it, but it's not really the Deep Purple I want to hear. I mean, Mandrake Root was the one song that I kind of thought was like the standout track of the album for me, but the rest of it, I mean, Hush was obviously the big hit off the album, which they still do live occasionally.
Hmm.
So, but I'd be okay if I never heard it again.
Well, to hear Ian sing it as opposed to
Yeah.
Rod Evans, totally different
Yeah.
thing. But if you have the live album, I don't know if you do the one they came out with for the House of Blue Light tour in the '88. That they actually got a studio version of Hush on there with Ian singing. So it's a little different, but it's cool to see him sing that, obviously, since he wasn't the one that sang it originally.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I, mean, I don't mind Rod Evans as a singer, but when Gillan now that because Gillan's so synonymous with that sound, that there's really not, there's no comparison. So
No, no, you're right about that. No comparison. All right. So that was your number 15. Mine is going to be The Battle Rages On. That one came out in 1993. Um, like you said, I believe that was the final one with Richie on that one. Came in only at 192. So
mhm.
obviously that probably pissed him off, among other things.
Yeah.
And like you said, I believe, you said this album was written with Joe and Turner in the beginning, and then they kind of redid it. So, um, and yeah, that was one of the bigger hits. That one I thought sounded really, really good. Time to Kill, another great song. Those are probably the two main highlights of the album. It's not actually, I actually like this album a little bit better. That's why it's a little bit higher than those other ones. It's just a shame though that that this is the last thing we have with Blackmore, with Deep Purple.
Mhm.
He was the original guitar player of the band, and I mean, obviously, there's only been three lead guitarists really, recording wise. So Morse, and then obviously the Tommy Bolin, who recorded the one album after he left during the
Mhm.
Come Taste the Band during the Coverdale Hughes era. So, all right, so number 15 for me. What do you got for 14?
14, I have Infinite.
Okay.
Pretty much everything that you said about the album is accurate. Birds of Prey was the one song that you did mention that kind of stood out to me. But the thing with a lot of those later, like the more recent Steve Morse albums, is they're all kind of the same to me. There's very little separating them. So
You're right. I mean, that's exactly what it is. I mean,
yeah.
once in a while you'll hear a song that you like, maybe one or two on these albums, and that's about it.
Yeah.
It's something, you'll listen to it, you might listen to it again, but for the most part, it's like you're gonna go back to listen to the albums that you really
Hmm.
if you gotta do I want to listen to Bananas, or do I want to listen to Fireball, or whatever the case may be. So I think that's what people, you know, tend to why they tend to navigate towards the other stuff more frequently. So I've got 14 for me. I've got the one you mentioned, one back there, I believe. I think it was your 15, Shades of Deep Purple.
Hmm.
The first album there, 68, came in at number 24. Wow, I was surprised it made it that high on the charts. That was pretty good. And you talked about Hush. I actually liked One More Rainy Day off that one as well. That was one that kind of seemed like it was better than the rest. So, not much else to add to there. You hit that one right on the head as well. Same old, it was a starting point. They had a lot to do to get noticed. I mean, usually when you chart with your first album, that's usually probably a pretty good sign of things to come. So there you go. That's
All
my
right, we're
number
at
14. We're
thir-
at,
all right,
yep.
we're at number 13. My 13 is Whoosh, and The Power of the Moon was the one song that I thought was a standout for me from that album.
Yeah, I think that's the thing we're kind of coming to. Some of these
Mhm.
albums only have like one track. You go,
Yeah,
yeah, this one is probably going to be the best one. So, what can you do? You can listen to these albums to your blue in the face, and maybe sometimes something will stand out after a while, but
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've listened to these things. I try to give them a couple listens before,
Mm-hmm.
like the ones I wasn't as familiar with because I haven't played them in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I obviously there's a couple of them like I mentioned that stood out, like Battle Rages On, for example, Anya. That was actually I think on one of their live albums as well. So certain songs you hear more often than others, so they stand out better. But then for the most part on these other albums that and it's not like even the classic rock stations don't even touch these new albums.
No.
They'll mention it maybe. Oh, Deep Purple just came out with a new album, but I guess it's not good enough for them to play.
Yeah,
Um,
I've even talked to people who are fans of the old Deep Purple, and they're not even aware that new stuff is still being made. So
that's a shame,
yeah.
really.
Hmm.
I wish there was something, with all this internet out here today, you figure more people would be in tune, of
Hmm.
what's going on, but sometimes that's just not the case. All right, so what was that now?
That
13?
was 13 for me.
Yep. So I've got Come Taste the Band. That was the one with Tommy Bolin. They recorded it in 75. Coverdale, Hughes are in the band at this point. It's the third album with Coverdale and Hughes. It'll be the last album with Coverdale and Hughes.
Hmm.
Um, Came in at number 43, so it was still they were still charting in the U.S., which around the mid 70s. That's pretty good, considering they had all new lineup and everything, and no Richie Blackmore. But songs that stood out was The Drifter for me, and then there's a this time around Ode to a G or Ode to G. That song definitely has some uniqueness to it. I seem to really enjoy those two songs off this album. There was a couple others that were okay. Not as good as Burn or Stormbringer, but still, it's Coverdale, it's Hughes, so it's not bad. Came in at 13.
Yeah, that you'll. I'll have more on that in a little while.
Okay. Yep. Oh yeah. All right. So now we got the top 12. So we're getting down here a little bit.
12 for me is Abandon, and Fingers to the Bone, as you mentioned, that's probably the standout track on that album for me. So
Not too much to add there.
not much really, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of like the album came out at a time where I don't think Deep Purple was really at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So, I mean, in terms of like a mainstream popularity, so a lot of that stuff just came out and then disappeared as quickly as it came out. So,
Yeah, and then some of the labels they were on too, they didn't print probably a lot of copies. So
yeah.
as
Hmm.
soon as the initial run of the albums were sold, I mean, you could only probably find them in like import shops or online. You'd have to look, but that at the time when it came out was 98. So
Hmm.
that was about the time when CD Now was big and Amazon was out there. So
Yeah.
that's how you would usually end up getting a lot of these albums because I know like if you try to go to like the stores at that point, like Best Buy when they were selling CDs and stuff like that, they didn't have it in stock. So, all right. So my number 12 is going to be the Book of Talisman. It's 1968. Same year as the other album came out. The first one came in at number 54. Um, Kentucky Woman obviously was the song that I think stands out the best overall for me. And then, of course, Ring That Neck is a classic. They used to play that a lot in the early live sets. Um, I mean, not really a much, it's not that great of an album, but then again, it beats all these other ones I just mentioned. Probably just because of these two songs alone. That's how, once you start getting some really strong material, that's going to help propel an album for me up into a lot better than where these other ones are lying here. So yeah, so that's what I got for number 12.
Yeah. Hmm. All right. My number 11 is the Book of Talisman.
Okay.
The only other song I would add is Shield. I think is kind of a deep cut on that album. That's pretty good. But pretty much it everything that you said and everything that we've said about the early albums with Rod Evans that kind of fits into that same category. So
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna hop on down my number 11, and this album I actually dig. I'm not gonna. This one I actually like. Perpendicular. This one is actually 1996. It was I believe that was the first one with Steve, right?
hmm
Steve Morse, 96. Perpendicular. Yep. They took a 3-year break after the old Battle Rages On fiasco with the tour, where Blackmore quit after halfway through the tour somewhere overseas. And I think Joe Satriani actually finished that tour for them live in the live concerts. So Perpendicular. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of good stuff on Perpendicular. I mean, it was definitely promising seeing the band with Morse after listening to this album. Sometimes I feel like Screaming, obviously, is the gem on this album. And they played this one at Darien.
hmm
A great song, phenomenal. Really enjoyed that one. Loosen My Strings is another one that stands out pretty good for me. Um, those are the two big songs on this album. Oddly enough, this one never charted. I guess no one wanted to give Steve Morse a chance or something. I don't know. I was kind of surprised when I went back and saw that some of the albums that I just mentioned where they charted at least in the high 100s, at least this album actually was a decent album compared to those. So I'm kind of surprised that they didn't that this album never charted.
hmm
You don't see that too often, but it was right around 96. So in that area, that's where all the grunge was in its prime and
yeah,
all that stuff. So once you were considered, an old school band, you were not in favor with anybody, record companies, radio stations. I mean, who was actually playing Perpendicular in 1996? That was another problem because so many of the classic rock stations were either booted off because their format got changed, like 103.3 The Edge, or whatever have you, the case may be. That's classic rock stations just they don't like to play new music. And that's
yeah,
usually why you see only songs up to about 1988, even today on classic
hmm
rock radio. It just, it's weird how you can go to like 104 oldies. 104 used to be known more as a 60s, 50s, 60s originally. And then
yep,
now they're playing like stuff in the 90s. It's
yeah,
insane.
hmm yeah. The format's definitely changed.
Oh yeah, definitely. But at least the one thing about that station is you get a good variety because they got 5 decades to choose from. So
Yeah,
you get a lot of choices. You never hear the same song twice. So
yeah. My number 10 is Now What. Uh,
okay.
I had Hell to Pay. It's written down as a standout track for me, but yeah, I don't. A lot of those Steve Morse albums from the last 10 years or so, I just don't seek them out that often. So it's kind of in that same category. I mean, it's a strong album. Like the playing is really good. It's just there's the
Hmm.
song don't really hold up.
Yeah, I mean that's for me. I mean, I'm not really like a jam band guy or something like that. I like good song structure, and I like good lyrics.
hmm
So, that's just my take on it. And, everybody has their own take. I mean, there's people out there who probably love these later Deep Purple albums because they offer so much different
hmm
stuff on them
Yeah,
compared
I
to
mean,
like,
they definitely indulge a lot of the progressive elements too. So
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of good things about the new albums,
yeah,
but for me, I'm a more of a song guy, so there's just not a lot that really is what I like about them as opposed to, like you said, the different elements in them.
hmm
All right, so my number 10 is going to be one that you mentioned really high up on your list. I think it was your number 21, Slaves and Masters. But you hit the nail on the head as far as the songs were concerned. King of Dreams has always been my favorite song off the album. And then The Cut Runs Deep is definitely right up there next to it, just like you mentioned. It charted at number 87. I remember when it first came out, there was no internet. I didn't know what was going on. I seen the Deep Purple album in the store. There was no radio station playing it.
hmm
I bought it. I said, "Oh, Joe and Turner's in it." Wow. I didn't have no idea because, sometimes back then you just didn't know a lot of stuff because
yeah,
there was no way to know until you actually bought the album or whatever the case may be if there was no radio airplay or anything. But, I mean, yeah, it's number 87. It hit on the charts. Other than those those two songs. I think the rest of the album's kind of middling. But it's definitely it's a good album to put on, to listen to perhaps like when you have something going on, you just want to have some really good music in the background. That's definitely really good album for that because you can't go wrong with the vocals of Jolyn Turner. So that's my number 10.
All right. Yeah, my number 9 is "Come Taste the Band." Now,
Okay.
it's kind of like it's always felt like an outlier album for me because obviously Blackmore's not on it, but I think I've grown to like it a little more in the last few years. I mean, Tommy Bolin was a really good guitar player, but stylistically he was different. This album's got kind of more of a funky soul vibe to it than the earlier albums. And I think at one point Richie Blackmore referred to it as shoeshine music, and that's why he didn't want to record it. So,
Yeah,
but
there was some talk about
yeah,
that, like you
I
said.
like Lady Luck is a good song, and Tommy
Mhm.
Bolin's solo on Drifter is really solid. I like that a lot. But man, I mean, Glenn Hughes obviously he was a mess with cocaine and addiction at this point, so that's why he wasn't going to be in the band much longer. But it's still a fun album to listen to.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know a lot of people kind of said the same thing that you did about how it doesn't really feel like a Deep Purple album because Blackmore's not there. And,
Yeah.
and you could see it. I mean, Richie actually mentioned it before he actually, as he was leaving, about how the last, after I think it was Stormbringer, he even mentioned how it was starting to get all these funky elements to it,
Hmm.
and he just wasn't into that at all. He really took out the blistering guitars though. When he went to Rainbow and formed Rainbow, then he
Hmm.
kind of went more, more foreigner like in a way. At least, especially by the time the last couple albums came out of Rainbows when you got Jolyn Turner in the band. So
Yeah, like straight between the eyes. Yeah,
that was a really good album.
yeah. I like that album a lot, but the Bent Out of Shape is where they kind of lost me a little bit.
Yeah. Well, they knew it was done at that
Yeah.
point, I guess. All right. So you're number 9. Mine, we're gonna go down to the 1969 Deep Purple. Uh, Came in at 162. Out of the three Rod Evans albums, the third one is The Charm. That's definitely my favorite Rod Evans album. Not as many covers, and I think the material was starting to, John Lord was finding his way. The drumming of Ian Pace, unbelievable on some of these songs. Bird Has Flown stood out, as well as Lalina. There was a couple other ones, but those are the two main ones for me. Yeah, I thought this album was pretty good. And then obviously this was Rod's last album before Ian Gillan came aboard. So number 9.
All right. Number 8. I have "Who Do We Think We Are" at number 8. I mean, I like it, and like "Woman from Tokyo" is probably the most well known song off the album. But I think "Rat Bat Blue" is probably the key track. It's the first song on side 2. It's just like that's a killer track. So
Yep, definitely.
and Gillen sounds great on it, but you can sense that they're starting to be a little tension in the band. So
Yeah, what is it with this band? There's always tension,
mhm.
at least early on. It's crazy. All right, so for me, my number 8, we're going back to 1974 and Stormbringer, the second album with David Coverdale, Glenn Hughes. Um, this album actually made gold in the States here and went to number 20. And the two songs that really do it for me are the closing track, Soldier of Fortune. That was one that Coverdale actually covered on one of his solo. Yeah, I guess I don't know if it's counted under a White Snake. It was just him and Adrian Vandenberg. They did like a special acoustic show in Japan, and they actually did Soldier of Fortune. Man, what a great job they did on that song. It was phenomenal. So Hold On also is another one from this album that I really enjoy. And of course, the title track obviously was one of their bigger hits that was on a lot of their earlier compilations. So yeah, number 8 for me, Stormbringer.
All right. 7 for me is "Perpendicular." I think it's the best album with Steve Morse by far. I mean, it was still early enough that Gillan's voice is still really strong on it, and the playing, like Steve Morse for his guitar playing, he introduced a lot of different techniques that Richie Blackmore didn't, like pinch harmonics and stuff like that. So it added a different sound to his guitar that Richie didn't bring. But I think that's a really strong album. I mean, the Aviator is really good. The Perpendicular Waltz closes the album. I think that's a really strong track also.
Yeah, I definitely totally agree with you. And then, like we said, the best album was Steve Morse, definitely by a mile. That was the highest Morse on my list too at number 11. So that was your number 7. So yeah, that's good. All right. So for my number 7, we're gonna go with the album that's behind me here. Number 7, Fireball, 71. Gold album reached number 32. Song Fireball, obviously, was one of the highlights there. And of course, a lot of other songs on here that stood out, but the big one was Strange Kind of Woman, which still was one of the mainstays in the set list today, you know. So Fireball, number 32 in the charts, and this was, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, the second album with Ian Gillan after the in rock album. So Fireball, they definitely, and that one hit number 1 in the UK in their homeland there. Um, and that was like their first number 1 in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they definitely, it's weird. There's their first 3 albums with Rod Evans did not even chart in the UK. How do you like that?
Yeah,
That's something I didn't even realize here, but they actually charted in the US. Weird.
that's surprising. Yeah.
That is weird. I didn't even realize that. So you learn something new every day, they say. All right. So there you have it. Fireball for me. So we got the top 6 coming your way.
Yeah. Number 6 for me is Stormbringer.
All right.
I'm a big fan of the Coverdale Hughes era in general. I think they, as great as Gillan was, I think they, when Glenn and David came in, they brought a different kind of a bluesy flavor to the music. And like the song that's always sung out to me is Lady Double Dealer. I think Coverdale sounds really solid on that song, and a lot of the elements of these albums, you kind of like you could hear early Whitesnake, like those early Whitesnake albums. You kind of transition into that. So there's a lot of good stuff on here. And Soldier of Fortune, as you mentioned, is a classic track also.
Yep, definitely. All right. So that brings me to my number 6. In rock. In rock, I know a lot of people like this album a lot more. But for me, number 6 came out in 1970. The first album with Ian Gillan. And I must say, probably one of the best songs. I don't know. It has to rate in my top 2, I would say, for Deep Purple. The Child in Time. Man, oh man, what a song. I don't think there's another. Yeah, that has to be my favorite Deep Purple song, actually. Over the years, it just really has grown big on me compared to where, it used to be one of those songs you're always familiar with. I know it's kind of a longer song, but it definitely, man, I seen it live one time. So to actually just only get to see it live one time, it stood out for me. It was on the House of Blue Light tour back when they played Rochester. Phenomenal, phenomenal show. The only downside was you can definitely see the band was not all together there.
Mm-hmm.
Blackmore was, you can already tell that there was tension going on and that tour was probably not going to last too long. And
Mm-hmm.
then sure enough, after it ended, that was another breakup. So, yep. So that's in rock. And the other song I wanted to mention was Speed King. Obviously, that was another one that really is those 2 songs really drive this album on top of the other songs. So there's a bunch of other ones, but I'm just going to name those 2 as my favorite 2. All right. So the top 5 are among us here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the top 5 was pretty. They're all pretty close. So, all right, my number
Okay.
5 is Fireball.
Okay.
This album came out in between In Rock and Machine Head, so it's a really solid album. I mean, there's not any like big radio hits off of it, but I I think Demon's Eye and The Mule were the 2 songs that kind of stood out to me when I listened to the album earlier this week. So I think those are my favorites off the album.
Okay, yeah, they're definitely a very, very good album. Yeah, we're pretty close. We're only off a I mean, when you got this many albums, for us to
Yeah.
be even in the same couple of differences apart, I mean, that's really good because we both pretty much have echoed each other's comments on these albums. So we're definitely in the same ballpark when we're talking about these albums, which is definitely what we want if we can be. But there's a couple of differences that we'll discuss here coming forward that will be a little bit different. But hey, everybody's got their own taste here. So that was your number five. Mine is Burn, 1974, the first album with Coverdale, and definitely probably the best song on the Coverdale out of his the ones that Coverdale sings. Burn is definitely the big one. You know, he still plays that live with Whitesnake nowadays a lot here, as he's on his farewell tour with Whitesnake.
Mhm.
Burn made gold only, surprisingly, but it did reach number nine on the U.S. charts. Obviously, the no introduction needed. That song "Burn" is the main catapult here that pushed this album over the top. But if you're looking for some other good songs, "Sail Away" is one that stands out for me, and "Might Just Take Your Life." Those are two songs that definitely are definitely must listens on this album.
All right. Number four. Number four for me is Machine Head. I've talked to a lot of people who consider that to be their definitive classic album,
Mhm.
which in a lot of ways it is because it's got the most probably well-known songs on it in terms of like Smoke on the Water and Highway Star and Lazy. But I mean, for me, I'd be okay if I didn't hear Smoke on the Water again. But I mean, it is a really the production on the album is tremendous. I mean, Gillen's that was like at his peak shrieking vocal style right there, which he can't quite hit those notes anymore. But I've also talked to people who think that's like the only great album Deep Purple ever put out. I don't think that's accurate either, but you know, it's definitely earned its place as a classic album, but it's not quite at the top for me.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's one of those ones that some people get burned out by the
Mm-hmm.
same old songs all the time, especially if you heard them like 4,000 times. I know I'm like that with a lot of bands actually. And it is what it is. If you really like the band, if it, like say if it's one of your favorites, you might be able to tolerate it a little bit more. But I can tell you right now, if I had never hear "Walk This Way" by Aerosmith, who's one of my top favorites of all time, if I never hear it again, I would be ecstatic. Especially live in concert because I've seen them so many times, and I've never seen them not play that song. So I see where you're coming from with that for sure. So number four, we're going. We're gonna remain perfect strangers. Um, Number four. This album definitely one of the band's best, and I'm surprised it actually was higher on my list. I thought it'd be down a little bit more, like around number 7 to 10 area, because the two songs on here, obviously the two tracks that they still play in concert to this day, "Knocking at Your Back Door" and the title cut, "Perfect Strangers." Those are the songs that really put this album on the map. If those two songs weren't on here, I don't think you would have seen the album do as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the rest of the songs are kind of in the middle, but the one that stands out of the middling songs would be "Mean Streak." I like that song. It went platinum. Obviously, it was the song the Mark II lineup reunited for the first time since 1973. Reached number 17, and just a solid album. You can't really say anything about it other than that because for me number four. So I don't think you mentioned that one yet. So you got it coming up sometime in the next
Yep.
couple little bit here.
I actually have it coming up right now. It's my number
Oh,
three.
okay.
So,
There you go.
yeah, it was a big deal when the Mark II lineup got back together, obviously, because as a band they hadn't Deep Purple itself hadn't made an album since Come Taste the Band, so they it was and when you see the music video for the title track, that was a big thing on MTV at the time with the band. Either they seem like they're in good spirits because they're getting back together in the studio again. But yeah, the title track, "Knocking at Your Back Door," are great, and I also had "Mean Streak" noted as a significant track on the album for me that I like a lot. So, and I just Blackmore soloing on the album is killer. I love his guitar tone. So, and I actually interviewed Chuck Wright from Quiet Riot a couple weeks ago, and I was asking him because when he was in Jafria opened for Deep Purple on that tour. And
Mm-hmm.
the first night of the tour, Jafria's set was so good that they almost got kicked off because apparently Blackmore was complaining that he didn't like that the crowd was giving them too big of a reception, so he made them cut their set down a little bit. So, which is a classic Blackmore thing because he's always been kind of eccentric in that way. So,
Yeah, and I actually talked to this lead singer from Jafria, David Glenn Isley, and he went into more details about how badly they were treated on the Deep Purple tour. I don't know how much you got into it with Chuck, but man, some of the things that they did to him,
mm-hmm.
I mean, come on, you're trying to put on the best possible show for the fans, and just because the opening band is, a good band, at the time they were right on top of their game when they were touring. It's not any way to treat anybody.
Yeah, and that Perfect Strangers tour was actually the second highest grossing tour in the U.S. in '85, right behind Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. So clearly the
That's
fans.
amazing. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Because there was time, I think he played here. What did he play here? About 4 nights or something like
mhm.
that on that tour.
Yeah,
So to be able to be the next highest grossing tour after Bruce, that's just amazing. You know.
yeah,
And it's a shame, the way things ended because they were hoping to build off of that Perfect Strangers album, and in my estimation, I thought they did, but we'll go into that shortly. But um, so that was your number three. So
great.
I'm up to this one, the one you mentioned earlier. Who do you think you are? Who do you think we are? uh, Went Gold. Was the last album with Gillan up until Perfect Strangers. Um, Hit number 15, and like you mentioned, yeah, there's no doubt in my mind the best song on the album by a country mile is Rat Bat Blue. I mean, I remember the first time I ever heard that song on the radio. I didn't know the song, so when I heard it, I'm going, what the heck is this? This is awesome.
Mhm.
I heard it, I think it was back, yeah, this was back in the day when I don't know how far back you go with our radio, but 90 some rock folded their tent over and changed to an adult contemporary station in about 1984, 85. It was like the early part of 85. And so then we were like basically left with 103.3 WPHD,
Mhm.
and they started taking over more and more into the album rock to kind of pick up in 97 Rock's absence. So and that's where I first heard that song, believe it or not. It was about 85, 86 on that radio station. And sadly enough, 97 Rock doesn't even play Rat Bat Blue. I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense. But another song they actually played on that station was "Place in the Line" from that album, and that's another song I really dig on. Who do we think we are? "Place in the Line," another golden gem. A little slower, but Ian's voice on is top notch on that song. All right, so we got two left each.
Yeah. My one and two could have gone either way. I pretty much flipped a coin, but my number two is In Rock. I mean,
Okay.
the classic album cover. I mean, the side one of Speed King, Bloodsucker, and Child of Time it doesn't really get any better than that for me. And Child of Time is probably my favorite Deep Purple song. Also, it's just a masterpiece. But
Yeah, definitely, definitely, definitely. All right, so that is number two for you. And this is the album where a lot of people, for some reason, like taking shots at this album. I don't know why, but it's the House of Blue Light, baby. I've always loved this album. I know it's not Perfect Strangers. I know it's not, this or that, but man, oh man, this is to me, it's the most solid Deep Purple album that I can actually listen to pretty much every track all the way through without skipping anything. There's just some songs on some of these albums that I just skip, but this one I can play, believe it or not, I don't know why, but I could play it all the way through. Uh, Best song on the album by far, The Unwritten Law. They actually played that one live on that tour, although it wasn't on the live album. but they did play it live. Call of the Wild, that was one of the videos they played on the great old MTV, and then the other song on here that really stood out was the other one, Bad Attitude. That was another one I believe they made a video for, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Bad Attitude. But I mean, I just like this album. Hard Loving Woman. That was a great song. They did that one live. That was also on the live album that they came out with. Um, Dead or Alive ends the album. I really like that song. Mitzi Dupree. That's another song that really stands out. It's not a great song, but it's different. It's a different type of song. So it gives the album has pretty good flow because they're not all the same type of songs. That's one of the reasons why I like it.
Hmm.
You go for something like Hard Loving Woman, which is a really, a lot of good keyboard and guitar in it. And then you got something as crazy as Mad Dog. It's just a great album all the way through. I really, really enjoy this album, and that's why for me, it's my number two album.
All right, yeah. My number one is Burn.
Oh,
I, I'm a I'm a huge fan of Glenn Hughes. He's one of my favorite singers of all time. I just because he had done trapeze before he was in Deep Purple, and they had a lot of great stuff in that band for a while.
hmm
And he even in the '80s he did an album with Black Sabbath, which is not technically the Black Sabbath sound of an album that you want from them, but that's also a really solid album. But and here him and Coverdale trade off vocals, and the whole band is just on fire. I mean, Burn, the title track is great. Might Just Take Your Life. David Coverdale does a great ballad on Mistreated, and I just think it's I don't for me there's not really a skippable track on here. That's one of the albums I've always just it's been the definitive Deep Purple album for me.
All right, yeah, definitely a great album. No doubt about that. That one is definitely. It's just weird how you got a Coverdale album as your number one, because
Mm-hmm.
most people would always think Gillan was the main, the
Yeah.
guy. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is definitely the best Coverdale album by a mile.
Yeah.
And for me, mine was number five, yours is number one. So, they're definitely up there in the upper echelon of the ranking the catalog. So we definitely know that those albums are definitely classic killer albums that we definitely highly recommend to everybody for sure. And oddly enough, I must seem like one of these home fans or whatever they call them, fanboys. This is the number one for me, Machine Head. Unfortunately, fortunately, that's the one that always seems to top a lot of the lists, like you said. You know, I I just think that that's just the overall. It's just the overall solidness of the album, I guess, is why it's number one for me. Um, you can't really go wrong picking it. It definitely has you know, songs on there that like you said, you probably don't need to hear them again. The opening riff, "Smoke on the Water." But I will say this, even me, I am kind of you know, tired of hearing that song myself. But I will say one thing: when I played Art Park a few years back, and they started giving us that riff, it definitely gave me a weird feeling of how great that song really is. And in a live setting, it just, like, even though you heard it 3,000 times on the radio or whatever the case may be, to hear it live is a totally different bird. And I just thought that Morse played that song to perfection that night at our park there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously you kick the album off with Highway Star, which has pretty much always been the main opening track whenever Gillan was in the band.
Mm-hmm.
Pictures of Home, Lazy, what a great instrumental that is. Well, it does have singing in it, but it feels like an instrumental. For the most part, at the length, there's not as much singing in there as there was some of the other songs. But Space Truck, and that's another classic Deep Purple that whenever you go see them live, you're gonna see them do that song. It's just a solid album. It's only got 7 cuts on there, but they're definitely 7 great songs. That definitely, the highest charting Deep Purple, the biggest seller in the U.S. Hit number 7, and obviously double platinum. It's the only album of theirs that reached more than on the studio albums that reached more than a regular platinum sale. I would have to say, even at this point, you would have to think that album sold a lot more than that.
Hmm.
I just we talked about this before. It seems like these guys, they never update the because I guess it costs them money or something if they want to update the rankings there for the R. Just another weird thing there that they do with all this garbage. But there you have it. 21 albums ranked, top to bottom. Still, one of the greatest catalogs that you'll ever come across as a whole. I mean, 21 albums, man, that's a lot of we did a lot of listening to get this
Yeah.
to get
And
this ranked.
I even went back and listened to a lot of the live albums too. With this,
Yeah, they got so many good live albums. We almost have to do a show on just a live
yeah,
album someday.
yeah, Made in Japan
Oh,
is one of
yeah,
the best.
no doubt. Yeah, that's always the one people always seem to bring
Yeah.
up when you're talking classic live Deep Purple. It just doesn't get any better than that. That's for sure.
Hmm. And then they have this one, Made in Europe, is also pretty solid. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this band definitely. It's hard to believe it took them as long as it did to get into the Hall of Fame, but we know how much of a sham that is. Unfortunately, they should have been there 15, 20 years ago.
mhm.
There's no doubt in my mind. I don't care if you took 8 years off or whatever it was just to before you got back together. Um, the influence they put on so many bands. I mean, you talk to any of these bands from the 80s pretty much, and these guys will tell you, that Deep Purple was one of their main influences. I believe it was Joe Elliott actually from Def Leppard. He said there was only three bands in the early 1970s: Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Deep Purple. Those are the only bands you need to really hear in the early 70s like that. He said that those were it. It didn't get any better than that. So he's definitely right about that one. Those three bands are definitely and oddly enough, we're gonna might as well mention this now. We're gonna be doing Black Sabbath down the road, so get ready, folks. That's
Yeah,
another humongous task to rank that catalog. Another really expansive catalog there. So
yeah,
be ready.
I'm looking forward to that one. So
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's gonna be a good one with all the different singers and everything that band has had. They got even it's these bands have been around for a long time, and there's so much history. So much history and so much great music, and that's why we do these. You get to kind of help point out songs or albums that maybe that just didn't get the total recognition it deserves, and it helps maybe turn somebody on to some of these albums that never got a chance to hear them, whatever have you. So yeah, don't be afraid to leave some comments. We'd like to see what you guys think of the rankings, and give us your own rankings. You don't have to list all 21 if you want, because I know that would take a lot of time. But if you want to list like your top five, that would be cool, or top three, even for that matter. Just drop us a line in the comments. Let us know, what your take is. I'd be dying to hear. Maybe list your top three from the Steve Morse era or something, just to see, where some of those are bands, what people think about those albums, because those are the ones that tend to get overlooked these days. You're always going to have the people looking at the classic ones, but it's the newer, more recent ones sometimes that seem to get overlooked. And it'd be interesting to see what people have to say about these newer albums.
yeah, I
All
mean,
right.
it's definitely a catalog that you can spend a lot of time exploring or
Yeah.
rediscovering if you haven't listened to a lot of the stuff in a while. So
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's a good way to look at it, the rediscovering, because I had all these albums. Every time a new Deep Purple album come out, I'd buy it. I got a lot to listen to here, so I don't always get a chance to listen to all of my albums that I want to. If I could retire from my job and just listen to albums, wouldn't it be great?
yeah,
Wouldn't it? Some year, some year. All right, Dave. Well, hey, I mean, I thank you for doing this with me. This has been a blast going through
yeah,
these albums.
I enjoy it a lot. So yeah,
Definitely a great time here. So, yeah, so be on the lookout. Black Sabbath will be coming up probably sometime this month, and we'll let you know when it's available. And this one, just leave us some comments and let us know what your take is. All right. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think we covered it there.
All right. And of course, David, you can check out his site. I'll put it up there at the end here. Music and Other Drugs. And he's been doing some writing for some other people, I guess, if you want to tell him about that.
Yeah, I'll for my own website, I'll have the interview with Chuck Wright coming on Saturday. I'll have the whole piece up. We talked about Jafria, House of Lords, and he's also got a new solo project coming out, so you can stay tuned for that. And then I've also been doing album reviews for Sea of Tranquility as of last week. So
Oh, good deal. Good deal. All right. I'll put those links up there for everybody to look at so they can check out your work and take a look at some of that great stuff there. And yeah, great to see you again. And we'll be back at it shortly.
all right, yeah, thanks. Well, can't wait.
All right. Yep. All right, man. Take care.